Hi, this is Greg. Look for my book, The Agile Brand, on Amazon or on my website at theagile.world. Welcome back to the Agile World podcast. This is Greg Kihlstrom. I've talked a bunch about some of the basics of branding, what makes a successful brand. In this episode, I thought I'd talk a little bit about my introduction to branding and how I kind of got interested in it in the first place. And it actually goes back quite a few years. So as a child, I was really interested in cars, and I found cars pretty fascinating. I memorized statistics, and I knew all sorts of things about them. I tried to convince my dad to buy all sorts of outlandish things that he was fortunately sensible enough to not buy. But over time, I kind of realized that part of my fascination with them was really, I think, cars and car branding is a pretty fascinating exercise in hierarchy. And so when I mention hierarchy, I mean there are brands like Cadillac and Chevy, and there used to be Pontiac and Oldsmobile, but they're all owned by GM. And so you have this GM brand, but it's not really a brand so much as a collection of brands. And at an early age, I somehow found this fascinating. I didn't really have a word for it. In third or fourth grade, they don't really teach branding, so I didn't really have a word for it. To use my terms, I didn't really have a vocabulary for what I was talking about. I just knew that I was kind of fascinated with it. And I also like drawing, so I came up with my own line of cars. I drew them. I'm sure they're not from an engineering standpoint, very technically accurate, but what I found fascinating, again, was this idea that I actually created a couple brands of, just through doing these drawings. And, I kind of outgrew that and outgrew following horsepower and wheelbases of cars and stuff like that. But in thinking about, particularly as I was writing my book, The Agile Brand, it was my first introduction to branding and really kind of understanding this idea of target audience and positioning. A Lincoln was positioned very differently than a Ford, even though underneath them both really were most of the same pieces of machinery, the same metal, the same parts, all of those kinds of things. You can tell I'm a super car geek, but truly understanding that the Lincoln logo was somehow more valuable than the Ford one taught me a lot. It taught me about positioning, about expectation. The expectation of a Porsche versus a Chevy was very, very different. People weren't necessarily disappointed when they bought a Chevy. They knew what they were getting. But if they got the same experience from a Porsche than they did a Chevy, then there would be a problem. So I think, at this early age, I really kind of had this appreciation for brands. And as I followed, I still follow cars as a branding exercise and find it fascinating. I think it's fascinating that how cars are now trying to appeal to new generations. I mean, millennials who statistically, it's said they're driving less, they're buying cars less, all of those types of things. Future generations, we'll see what happens, but the role of the car in people's lives is changing, and so the brands need to change. You can kind of see how some of the brands are embracing this change. Some are trying to just stay true to their roots. I continually find it fascinating. In the next few episodes, I'm going to talk about the evolution of brands, and I'm going to start with the idea of brand as object. Thanks for listening. See you next week. If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please rate the show on iTunes or contact me through my website at theagile.world. You can find my books, The Agile Brand and The Agile Web, on Amazon and on my website at theagile.world.